Atlanta, Georgia. 5:42 a.m. The streets outside the Cobalt Peach are still soaked in rain and silence. A city asleep, unaware that inside its neon-lit belly, something unspeakable has just happened. The rain has stopped, but the streets still glisten, wet asphalt reflecting pink neon from a sign that flickers outside a quiet strip club called the Cobalt Peach. Inside, the air is thick with silence, that eerie kind of stillness that settles after chaos. Club owner Truxton Pryor arrives early, as he always does. He pushes open the door, muttering about bills and schedules, unaware that his life and the club's are about to split in two. The hallway smells of cheap disinfectant and perfume. A chair lies tipped over. Somewhere, a light hums. Then he sees it, his office door, cracked open. He nudges it wider and freezes. On the floor, sprawled beneath the glow of a single desk lamp, lies Soraya Tate. Her stage name was Onyx, 28, the club's star dancer, the kind of woman who could pull the world into her orbit with a glance. Now lying still, eyes open, mascara streaked down her face like ink bleeding through paper. Truxton's breath falters. He steps closer, too afraid to speak her name. Something is in her mouth, a folded note, stained dark at the edges. He doesn't touch it. He doesn't have to. The room already tells him everything he needs to know. The clock on the wall ticks once, twice, then stops. Outside, the neon flickers out. Inside, the truth begins to breathe. By morning, the headlines would whisper her name. But what led to this flaw, this silence, began long before dawn ever broke over Atlanta. The Cobalt Peach opened every night at 7, and by 7:30, the bass from the main floor was already shaking the walls. It wasn't the kind of club tourists bragged about. It sat off Cheshire Bridge, squeezed between a pawn shop and a check-cashing place. But it stayed busy enough to pay the lights, the liquor license, and the girls who worked the stage. Soraya Tate had been there 4 years. Most nights, she arrived early, hair tied up, earbuds in, sliding past the bouncer with a nod. Inside, the routine never changed. Rashawn Veers, the floor manager, checked the rotation board with a clipboard in one hand and a cold coffee in the other. No drinks backstage, no clients behind the curtains. Anyone caught fighting, gone by sunrise. He repeated it every night, as if the rules could hold the chaos together. Bishop Quell, the senior guard, stood near the hallway where private booths lined the wall. Tall, heavy-set, quiet. People said he could break a man's jaw with one hand, but he rarely needed to prove it. Beside him, the younger guard, Terrell Knox, was all energy and quick temper, always grinning until someone gave him a reason not to. Naima Solis moved between the mirrors in the dressing room, lashes in one hand, cigarette in the other, talking about bills, about men, about how one day she'd leave Atlanta for good. Soraya listened, but rarely answered. She'd change into her heels, fix her hair, and glance at the rotation list without saying much. On stage, she became someone else. Onyx, the one who made men forget where they were. The regulars knew her dance by heart. She moved with precision, never rushed, never smiled unless she wanted to. Tips rained steady, and she made sure to thank no one twice. When the sets ended, she'd step off the stage, wipe the sweat from her neck, and vanish behind the red curtain. Some nights, she'd share a drink with Naima, laugh at Terrell's jokes, and pretend the world outside the club didn't exist. Other nights, she'd stare at her reflection long after the music stopped, studying the woman looking back. The club lived on repetition, and repetition kept everyone safe. Or so they thought. But safety is fragile when secrets are waiting for a crack. A week later, Soraya found herself sitting in a narrow clinic room on Peachtree. She hadn't felt well for days, fatigue that wouldn't lift, a fever that lingered. The nurse asked her to wait while the doctor reviewed the results. The clock ticked slow, the walls painted the color of old paper. The doctor came in holding a file, and a look that avoided her eyes. The words were simple, practiced, the kind they said often enough that emotion wasn't required. Positive for HIV, positive for HSV 2. He spoke about treatment, medication, prevention. He said people live long lives now, that science had changed things. He handed her a prescription and a list of support groups. He told her to notify her partners. Soraya nodded, but her mind was somewhere else. She thought about rent, about her mother in Decatur, about the club that never stopped needing her. When she walked out of the clinic, the sun was bright, too bright, the world moving like nothing had changed. She folded the papers into her purse and kept walking. That night, she went to work. Rashawn was already shouting orders, Naima was already laughing, and the customers were already waiting. Soraya took her place on the rotation board as if nothing had happened. In her head, the doctor's voice echoed, fading with every beat of the music. "Tell them," he'd said. But she didn't, and in that small decision, the clock that would count down the rest of her life began to tick. If you've been drawn in by this story so far, if you're already trying to piece together what really happened inside the Cobalt Peach, go ahead and tap that like button. It helps more people find stories like this one. And if you want to stay with us as we uncover the rest of this mystery, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. By the next weekend, the Cobalt Peach was moving at full capacity again. Lights flashing, bass shaking, tips flying. To anyone watching from the crowd, it looked like any other Friday night, but for Soraya Tate, the rhythm felt different. Every song sounded louder, every face in the audience sharper, every movement heavier with the weight of what she carried. Her name went up on the board again at 10. When she stepped off stage after her second set, Rashawn met her near the bar with a clipboard in hand. Booth 7 had requested her for a private dance. 30 minutes, prepaid. The man's name on the slip made her chest tighten. Omari LaRue. They hadn't seen each other in nearly a month. Regular client, quiet, respectful, paid in cash. She nodded to Rashawn and walked down the narrow hall toward the booth. When she opened the door, Omari was already seated, elbows on his knees, a folder balanced between his hands. He didn't greet her. He didn't look up. She tried to smile, tried to lighten the air, but the silence pressed down like heat. She started the music. Slow, just as he always liked. 2 minutes passed before he spoke. His voice was low, hoarse, breaking between the words. He told her he'd been to a doctor, that he'd tested positive. He lifted the papers from the folder and dropped them at her feet. The words came faster after that. Accusations, disbelief, anger. He wanted to know when she knew, why she hadn't said anything. She backed away, hands raised, whispering that she didn't mean for any of this, that she didn't even know it was him. But he was already on his feet, his eyes wild, his fist clenched. When the first blow landed, the mirror behind her cracked. She screamed, stumbled, caught the edge of the couch. The music kept playing. It wasn't until the door burst open that the beating stopped. Bishop and Terrell dragged Omari out into the hallway while he shouted her name, promising everyone would know what she'd done. Soraya sat on the floor, one hand to her cheek, the other clutching the broken chain from her neck. Minutes later, Rashawn appeared, his voice tight, telling her to go upstairs. Truxton wanted to see her. She followed the hallway to the office, head lowered. Truxton was waiting behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, a bottle of water half empty beside a stack of paperwork. He looked at her bruised face, then at the blood on her sleeve. He asked if what the man had said was true. She said yes. The words came out flat, as if rehearsed. She told him about the clinic, about the pills, about the 6 men who paid her outside the club. She said she tried to be careful, that sometimes they refused, that she didn't know how to stop. Truxton stood up, pacing. He reminded her of every rule he'd ever set. No drugs, no drama, no disease. He said she'd put the whole place at risk. She tried to apologize, but he cut her off, slammed his hand on the desk, asked how many more might come back with papers like that man downstairs. He poured himself a drink, stared out the window, and finally told her to take a few days off. No pay, no stage, no contact with anyone. He needed time to think before the city or the health department did. Soraya nodded, wiping the blood from her lip. She asked if she still had a job. He didn't answer. When she left his office, the hallway was empty. The music had stopped. The only sound left in the club was the buzz of a single light, flickering over the door she'd just closed. Naima was waiting in the parking lot when Soraya stepped outside. She'd seen the guards dragging the man out earlier and already knew something bad had happened. Soraya's face was swollen, her lips split, and she moved as if every step hurt. Naima didn't ask questions at first. She just unlocked the car and told her to get in. For the first few miles, neither of them spoke. The city passed by in flashes of light and shadow. When Naima finally looked over, Soraya was staring out the window, her eyes wet, her voice low when she finally spoke. She said the man who hit her had tested positive. Said she'd known she was sick for months, that it wasn't just him. Naima slowed the car. She asked how long. Soraya said a year. She said she was taking medicine, that the doctor said she could live fine, that she hadn't wanted anyone to look at her differently. Naima pulled over, hands gripping the wheel, trying to understand. Soraya told her about the 6 men, the motel rooms, the nights she told herself it didn't matter. She said she thought she could handle it, that no one would ever find out. Naima asked if she'd used protection. Soraya said sometimes. Naima covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head. She told her this wasn't something she could hide. People were going to talk. Someone might already be talking. She said Soraya needed to go to the clinic again, tell them everything. Or, better yet, leave town before the police or the press got hold of her name. Soraya didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead, the street light cutting across her face. When Naima dropped her off at the apartment, she promised she'd check in the next day. Soraya nodded, but neither of them believed tomorrow would fix anything. For the next 2 days, Soraya stayed inside. The phone rang, but she didn't answer. When she finally stepped out on the 3rd night, she kept her hood up and her eyes down. She felt the weight of every stare, even when no one was looking. That same night, the Cobalt Peach stayed open later than usual. The regulars were rowdy, the tips were good, and Rashawn had hired a DJ to bring in a bigger crowd. Truxton stayed upstairs doing paperwork, leaving the floor to Bishop and Terrell. It was close to 1 in the morning when it happened. A man in a hoodie walked in through the side door, face hidden, shoulders squared. No one noticed him at first, not until he swung the bat. The sound of shattering glass cut through the music. Bottles exploded across the bar, liquor spilling over the counter. Terrell moved first, reaching for him, but the bat caught him across the arm and dropped him to his knees. People scattered. Some ran for the exit, others froze. The man yelled something about being ruined, about her, about what she'd done. Then Bishop came out of nowhere, grabbed him from behind, and slammed him into the floor. The bat rolled away. The man kicked, cursed, tried to get up, but Bishop pressed a knee into his back until he went still. Truxton came down a minute later, his shirt half-buttoned, his eyes sharp with rage. He looked at the broken bar, at the crowd of dancers huddled near the door, then at Bishop standing over the man on the floor. He told Bishop to let him go. When the man ran out into the street, no one followed. Truxton turned to Rashawn and said not to call the police. No reports, no questions, no attention. Then he looked at the staff and said it was over. Everyone out. Before they left, Naima asked if he was going to call Soraya. Truxton said she was the reason this happened, that until he figured out how to fix the mess, she was banned from the building. That night, while the others drove home, Truxton stayed behind in his office, staring at the damage, a bottle of whiskey half empty on his desk. He knew the man with the bat wasn't the last. He knew others were coming. And somewhere across town, Soraya sat in her dark apartment, unaware that every door she'd ever opened was about to close. For the next 3 days, Soraya Tate barely left her apartment. She kept the curtains closed and the television running without sound. The phone rang often, but she didn't answer. Naima called, Rashawn called, even her mother left a message asking if she was all right. She let them all go to voicemail. The longer she stayed quiet, the heavier the silence became. She pushed furniture against the front door, checked the lock twice before sleeping. The streetlight outside flickered through the blinds, cutting across her face each time she tried to rest. On the second night, she thought she heard someone on the stairs. When she looked through the peephole, no one was there. The next morning, a piece of folded paper sat on her doormat with no writing on it. She tore it up and threw it away, but her hands kept shaking. By the third day, she ran out of groceries. The corner store was only 2 blocks away, yet she stood at the door for 10 minutes before turning the knob. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. Every sound made her turn her head. At the store, she kept her hood up. She caught her reflection in the freezer glass, tired, thin, eyes too wide. On the walk back, she thought she saw a man across the street watching her. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there with his hands in his pockets. When she blinked, he was gone. That night, she called Naima and said she was thinking of coming back to work, at least for a few shifts. Naima told her Truxton wasn't happy, but the club could use her on a slow night. Soraya agreed. She couldn't keep sitting in that room waiting for the next knock on the door. The next evening, she showed up early. Rashawn met her at the door with a cautious look, said he'd put her on the early rotation. The crowd was light, mostly regulars who didn't ask questions. She danced once, short set, kept her distance. When 2 customers offered private dances, she refused both. Rashawn frowned, but didn't press. Truxton came downstairs once, looked in her direction, then turned away without a word. The hours passed quietly. It almost felt normal again. Music, tips, polite laughter. Soraya stayed close to Naima and left before the crowd picked up. She walked to her car with her keys ready, telling herself the worst had passed. The drive home was short, the streets nearly empty. She parked by the curb, grabbed her bag, and stepped out. The sound of her heels echoed against the pavement. When she reached the building's entrance, something made her stop. Across the street, under the yellow glow of a streetlight, a tall figure stood still. She couldn't make out the face. She pretended not to see, hurried up the steps and heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw the figure moving fast, closing the distance. Her keys fell from her hand. She ran. The man's shoes hit the pavement hard, chasing close behind. She cut across the corner and onto the main road, waving at the first car she saw. It was a cab, slowing for a light. She yanked the door open and jumped inside, breathless, shouting at the driver to go. The cab pulled off as the man stopped in the middle of the street, watching. She looked back once and caught a glimpse of him before he stepped out of the light and disappeared into the dark. She told the driver to take her somewhere safe. After a moment, she said the only place she could think of, the Cobalt Peach. She leaned against the seat, heart pounding, eyes on the mirror. She didn't know who the man was or if he'd been there before. All she knew was that someone was waiting for her, and the club, once her escape, was the only door left to run through. When the cab pulled up outside the Cobalt Peach, the lights inside were still on, though the crowd had thinned. Soraya went straight to the door. Rashawn tried to stop her, but she pushed past him and asked for Truxton. He came down from his office a few minutes later, irritation written across his face, until he saw the fear in hers. She told him someone had been following her, that she'd almost been caught outside her apartment. Truxton didn't speak right away. He looked toward Bishop, who stood near the back exit with his arms crossed. Then he told her to come upstairs. The club was half empty now, and his voice dropped low enough that no one else could hear. He said she could stay there for the night, that it was safer than being alone. He pointed toward the hallway leading to the old staff rooms and told Bishop to keep an eye on her until morning. Bishop nodded once, silent as always. He led her to the end of the corridor, opened the door to staff room C, and flipped on the light. The room was small, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a single chair. Soraya stepped inside, still shaking, still holding her purse like a shield. Truxton ordered Terrell to take the door rotation downstairs and said Bishop would handle the second floor. Soraya was to stay put, no visitors, no phone calls from the club line. She nodded, promising she wouldn't leave. Truxton reminded her that whatever was happening outside couldn't follow her inside, not if she stayed quiet. Then he walked away without another word. When the door closed, the silence settled heavy around her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. For a long time, she didn't move. The faint murmur of music from the club below came and went. Every so often, she heard Bishop's footsteps in the hall. After an hour, she reached for her phone. Her fingers hesitated over the screen before she finally scrolled to her mother's number. The call connected on the second ring. Marva Tate's voice came through tired but warm. She asked why her daughter sounded out of breath, what was going on. Soraya tried to answer, but her voice broke halfway through. She said she'd made mistakes, that she'd hurt people, that she didn't know how to fix any of it. Marva didn't interrupt. She listened while Soraya told her everything, about the diagnosis, the club, the clients, the attack, and now the man who followed her. When she finished, the silence stretched long enough that Soraya thought the line had gone dead. Then her mother said she still loved her. She said it softly, as if speaking to a child again. She told her to come home, that they would figure it out together, that she didn't care what people said. Soraya wiped her eyes and nodded, though her mother couldn't see. She said she would come in the morning, that she'd take the early bus to Decatur and leave this city behind. Marva told her she'd meet her at the station. Before hanging up, her mother said something she hadn't heard in years. She said, "You're still my girl, no matter what." When the call ended, Soraya sat in the quiet room for a long time, clutching the phone to her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. She told herself she could still start over, that one more sunrise would make a difference. But outside the door, footsteps paused for a moment too long. Then they moved again, steady, fading down the hallway. It was after 3 when the knock came. Soraya had drifted into a light sleep, her phone still in her hand. The first knock was soft, the second louder. Then a voice called her name. It was Bishop. He said Truxton wanted to see her. She sat up, still half dreaming, asking what time it was. He told her it was important, something the boss needed to handle before morning. She hesitated but opened the door. Bishop stood in the hall, calm as ever. Eyes unreadable. He told her to come with him. They walked down the corridor together. The hallway felt longer than it had earlier. The lights dimmer. When they reached Truxton's office, Bishop stopped, turned the handle, and told her to go in. She asked if Truxton was waiting inside. He nodded once. She stepped through the door. The lock clicked behind her. The office was lit only by the desk lamp. A man sat in Truxton's chair. She froze when she saw his face. It was Marcellus Pike, one of her old regulars, someone she hadn't seen in nearly a year. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, the corner of his mouth tight, a single sheet of paper resting on the desk in front of him. She asked where Truxton was. Marcellus said he'd paid enough to be here without interruptions. She tried the handle, but it didn't move. He told her to sit. She didn't. She kept her distance. He leaned back in the chair, still watching her. Then he began to talk. He told her he'd lost everything, that his fiancée had tested positive first, that she'd blamed him, left him, told everyone she knew. His job had found out. Word spread faster than the truth ever could. He said the day the HR letter came, he realized his whole life had collapsed because of one choice he'd made. Her. Soraya tried to speak, to explain that she hadn't meant to hurt anyone, that she was sick herself, but he cut her off. He said he'd spent months tracking her down. He'd found out where she worked, who owned the place, how much it cost to get a favor from a man like Bishop. He said it wasn't hard. People always have a price. Soraya's voice broke when she said she was sorry. She said she'd been planning to leave town in the morning. He said he'd heard that line before. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small handgun. He placed it on the desk and slid it forward so she could see it. She took a step back. He reached into his pocket again and unfolded a piece of paper. He told her to open her mouth. She shook her head, begged him not to do it, promised to disappear, to never speak his name. He said this wasn't about disappearing, it was about balance. Then he forced the paper between her lips, pressing it in until she could no longer speak. For a moment, neither of them moved. She raised her hands, tears streaking down her face. He watched her, his breathing steady. Then he pulled the trigger once. The sound faded quickly. She stumbled, her back hitting the wall, and slid down to the floor. Her hand twitched against her chest, then went still. Marcellus stood there, staring at her, then at the paper now stained dark where it protruded from her mouth. He reached out and touched the edge of the desk, steadying himself. He said her name once, quiet, almost like a prayer, then turned and walked to the door. When he opened it, Bishop was waiting. They looked at each other, no words exchanged. Marcellus tucked the gun back into his jacket and left through the service corridor. Bishop closed the door slowly and stood there for a long time before walking away. In the office, the light from the lamp flickered once. The room was still except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. The hands moved past 3:15. Soraya's phone lay on the floor near her foot, the screen still lit, her mother's last message unread. By the time the city began to wake, the club was quiet again. Upstairs, the door to Truxton's office remained closed. Inside, the note stayed where Marcellus had left it, pressed between her lips, its meaning written clear enough for anyone who would find her next. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta, the cobalt peach looked like it always did after a long night, quiet, tired, pretending nothing had happened. Truxton Pryor parked in his usual spot, carrying his keys and a half-empty coffee. The building was still, no sound from inside. He pushed open the door and stepped into the darkened hallway. Upstairs, his office door was shut. He reached for the handle and found it unlocked. The moment he opened it, the smell of blood hit him first. Then he saw her. Soraya Tate lay against the wall, her legs bent awkwardly, the desk lamp still burning beside her. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was slightly parted around a piece of paper jammed deep between her lips. Truxton froze. His breath caught somewhere in his throat. He took one step closer, then another. He leaned forward, reached out, and pulled the folded paper free. The words were written in bold, uneven letters, thick black marker cutting across the page. 6 for 6. He stared at it, his hand trembling. It didn't take long to understand what it meant. 6 men for 1 woman. Every life touched by hers, now balanced by her death. Truxton sank into his chair, staring at the floor. His pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to believe she'd brought this on herself, that none of it could touch him, but the thought wouldn't hold. He'd known about the side deals, the men who came and went. The quiet favors passed for cash. He'd known and stayed silent because the money was good and silence was easy. He picked up his phone and dialed. When the dispatcher answered, his voice came out flat. He said there'd been a shooting, that a woman was dead in his office, that they should hurry. Then he hung up and sat back, unable to take his eyes off her. The door behind him creaked. He turned his head and saw Bishop standing in the doorway. The guard didn't say a word. Their eyes met for a moment, heavy and cold. Then Bishop turned and walked away down the hall. Truxton looked back at Soraya. The paper he'd pulled from her mouth was still in his hand. He smoothed it out on the desk, stared at the words again, and whispered them under his breath. 646. Outside, the first siren echoed faintly through the streets. Inside, the club was still. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Truxton sat alone, waiting, knowing the story was over, and that every secret he'd ignored had finally come home. He realized the club would never open again, that no one would believe he hadn't known something like this was coming. For years he'd looked the other way, at what the girls did after hours, at the men who paid for more than what the stage offered, at the money that kept the lights on. Now there was no more pretending. Downstairs, the neon sign still glowed faintly against the glass, the same one that had called strangers in for years. Upstairs, the clock kept ticking. By the time the sirens reached the block, Truxton hadn't moved. He stared at Soraya one last time, at what was left of a life built on lies and silence, and he knew exactly what the note meant. It was the price of looking away. If you've been drawn into this story, take a second to like this video. It really helps others discover it. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about how it all ended? Did she deserve to be killed? Or should she have been given a second chance at life? And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories and dark untold accounts just like this one. Make sure to check out the end screen for more videos that will keep you thinking long after they're over.